say that he didn't say that.
So I have a number of questions, and I had wanted to split the time. Glancing through them, there's one important topic that you are both important in your writings addressing, and that's the American Jewish community and the change generationally in a relationship with Israel and strengthening Jewish identity. I'd like you to address what you see as the challenge of American-Israel-Jewish relationship.
Who should start?
Go ahead.
Okay, so maybe some of you will find this surprising, although Danny knows me well enough that he won't find it surprising. Our fundamental problem is not Israel, right? Our fundamental problem is Jewish illiteracy, right? We are engaged in this unprecedented experiment about what happens when radical acceptance meets radical illiteracy, right? What happens in terms of Jewish continuity is not very pretty. What happens is that Jewish parents tell their children to care very deeply about something they haven't taught their kids anything about, right? So people wonder, why are you not interested, Peter, in Australian rules football? I don't know anything about Australian rules football, right? Many American Jewish kids grow up with no experience of intellectual fascination with Judaism, even though they often grow up in very, very learned academic environments. No experience of Jewish joy. They get dragged to maybe Yom Kippur, right, every year, right? There's no sense of Judaism as something of joyous, something that's actually engaging, that's fascinating, that can help you live your life. And then everyone wails when they marry the Christian girl down the street. This is our fundamental problem, and it has implications for Israel, because if you don't care about Simchas Torah or Sukkot or anything else Jewish, why would you care about Israel? It's just another Jewish thing, right? The connection to Israel comes fundamentally out of the sense that, wow, I'm a member of this thing called the Jewish people. Half of our people live there. I have to care about it. It's also the place where the Tanakh took place, right? This is actually where the Bible happened, right? These things are what create a sense of connection and affiliation with Israel. Now, my preference would be that also came with a little bit of political criticism on the side, but frankly, I like speaking in Orthodox schools because when I go to speak to the Orthodox day schools, the kids all disagree with me about Israel, but they care about Israel passionately, right? They're already in the game. So I just have to try to convince them that maybe they should see it differently, but I don't have to convince them to care. Oftentimes when I'm speaking on a college campus or in some other more secular Jewish environment, they're progressive in a vague way. It's not like I need to convince them that Bibi Netanyahu is not the greatest thing since sliced bread, but my task is much harder. I have to convince them to care. And when they're saying, look, there are lots of other countries in the world, there are lots of other problems, I have to convince them to have a particular sense of commitment and allegiance and caring towards this Jewish state because they're Jews. That's harder, and that's our fundamental failure.
So I obviously agree with every single word of that. But here's where we differ. The question is what you and I do about that reality. The question is what you and I do with the fact that each of us have a readership and each of us have a following, and how we leverage whatever influence we have to try to change that. Because neither you or I are Henry Kissinger, and neither you nor I are Dennis Ross. We're not going to move the policy needle. You get one vote in this country, I pity you. I get one vote in my country. I used to pity me. I now feel pretty good. But that's all we get. You and I are not going to move the policy needle. We're going to move the devotion needle. And here's where you and I split. Because you're right that American Jewish kids are waltzing away from Israel. I mean, really fast. So Stephen Cohen and Ari Kelman put out a piece. It's on the internet. It's called Beyond Distancing. Came out a bunch of years ago, probably 7, 8 years ago. And they asked people a whole bunch of questions. But one of the questions was, if the state of Israel were to be destroyed, not wither away, not blah, blah, destroyed, would that be for you a personal tragedy? Now, not surprisingly, among American Jews 65 years of age and older, almost 80% said that the destruction of the Jewish state would be a personal tragedy. Also, not surprisingly, the lower you got, the lower the percentage. So that when you got to American Jews 35 years old and younger, and this, by the way, this poll did not include intermarried Jews for a complicated reason, which means that it got a slightly more conservative with a small c sampling than a regular open sampling would have been. Jews 35 years old and younger, 50% said that the destruction of the Jewish state would not be for them a personal tragedy. Now the question is, what do Peter Beinart and Daniel Gordis do about that? Peter, here's where you and I fundamentally disagree. Because people who were to just simply Google everything that you've written about the Jewish state in the past 5-7 years, and that's a lot, and a lot of very smart stuff, won't find a love statement. They won't find the one piece which talks about why you love it, why it's deep in your heart. It is riddled with criticism everywhere one turns, and if they don't come with the baggage that you and I both want them to come from, I would suggest that your corpus of writing is actually reinforcing their turning their backs and walking away. I'll give you two quick examples. Out of your book, The Crisis of Zionism, when you talk about this image of Israeli jets flying over Auschwitz and saying that it's a fantasy because Israeli jets never bombed Auschwitz, etc., what you write is, and I quote, "What they have bombed in recent years is the Gaza Strip, a fenced-in, hideously overcrowded, desperately poor slum from which terrorist groups sometimes shell Israel." That's all technically true, and it's completely wrong. It's not, it is a slum, and it is overcrowded. And there are, by the way, very rich neighborhoods in Gaza as well, but that's beside the point. From which terrorist groups sometimes shell Israel. That's not the experience of parents raising their kids in Sderot, where the playgrounds all have concrete, steel-reinforced bunkers so that their kids can get in them in 10 seconds. Not sometimes. It's people living in morbid fear all the time. It's my personal friend who's a principal of a junior high school and a high school talking to me about what it means to have kids in your 7th and 8th grade who wet their beds at night. It's about families that fall apart because you can't live with that kind of tension. Somebody who doesn't know the reality as well as you know it comes and reads that passage and says, why is Israel doing that? Simone Zimmerman, who for 5 days, exactly 5 days, was Bernie Sanders' representative to the Jewish community, was fired. No, she was. 5 days, she was fired. You came out with a piece defending her, and you said, I'm not quoting, but I remember it pretty carefully because I almost had a stroke. You said something like, a Jewish community that cannot somehow incorporate whatever with Simone Zimmerman is a community that eats its young. That was the phrase that I think you used. And basically is the American Jewish establishment once again showing no openness. Simone Zimmerman is not a kid. She's in her 20s, but she's an adult. She had a very adult job. And on her Facebook page, she accused Bibi Netanyahu of murdering 2,000 Palestinians in the summer of 2014. You want to have a conversation about how Israel conducted the war, you can have that conversation. You can also listen, by the way, to Colonel Richard Kemp of the British Armed Forces, who argued that he never, ever, ever saw an army take such care of trying not to harm citizens. I think he knows a little bit about something. But Israelis also argue about the conduct of the war. But when you say that Bibi Netanyahu, and obviously Israeli soldiers, among whom was then my son, murdered 2,000 Palestinians, murder is out of nowhere. Murder is all the wrong is on one side and all the right is on the other side. You can't say that. And when the minute that she said that, Bernie Sanders, believe it or not, was right to fire her. And the American Jewish establishment was right to demand that she be fired. And what you should have said is, the American Jewish establishment needs to be open to a wide array of positions. But when an American Jew accuses the Jewish state of murdering 2,000 people in the summer of 2014, he or she has crossed a red line that I, Peter Beinart, cannot in good conscience support, and I applaud Bernie Sanders for having gotten rid of her. The accounting that you and I have to give is to hold, to whatever extent we can, Israel accountable to the standards of liberal democracy, and we both agree about that, and to show young Jewish kids that we're not in favor of everything that Israel does, but fundamentally to model love and devotion. And I know that you feel it. I know that it's exactly who you are. And the thing that actually most perplexes me about your written corpus is that one has to look very far and wide to find it. And it's a hint here and it's a hint there. And you are actually part of the reason that those American Jewish kids are walking away from Israel.
Okay.